thank you. Good evening and welcome to the Sociological Review annual lecture. Some of you may know the Sociological Reviews. For some of you, this may be the first time interacting with us. So just as by way of context for this evening, the Sociological Review is one of the UK's oldest sociology journals, founded in 1908. And we're dedicated to rigorous theoretical, conceptual and empirical work and we seek scholarship that looks to kind of question the taken for granted and really bring the sociological imagination to life. We publish across all branches of sociology, and we pride ourselves as being a home for critical sociological thinking in the research in the UK and internationally. So with the Sociological Review Foundation, the charitable body that owns the journal, we're on a mission to promote sociological thinking to audiences within and beyond academia in order to raise wider awareness for key debates that shape our contemporary society. And we do this in a number of ways. For example, our annual lecture this evening, but as well as things as our Sociological Review magazine that's available on our website, as well as things like our Uncommon Sense podcasts. So the title of tonight's lecture, How to Do Migration Studies in Dark Times, highlights the conundrum that many social scientists face in the current social and political conjuncture. How to conduct meaningful research in the context of intersecting social, economic, political and environmental crises. And the lecture this evening, it's pertinent obviously to the field of migration studies, but I think the themes that we're going to surface tonight have great resonance beyond this. And the lecture this evening, I think, really critically responds to the journal's mission to provide a home for scholarship that is concerned with seeing the world anew, offering ways in which sociological praxis can contribute towards socially just and inclusive futures. And of course, tonight, the particular context that we face, discussions of borders and migration are never more relevant than they are at this particular moment in time. So it's a great honour to welcome you all here tonight to this evening's discussion. To kick us off and to set the tone for this evening's discussion, it is my pleasure to welcome Tawana Satole, who is a poet, playwright, musician, educator and facilitator based here at the University of Glasgow, where he is the UNESCO Artist in Residence, and his work crosses creative practice with refugee integration, language and the arts. And he's going to set the tone for what we're about to do this evening. Thank you.
Hello. How is this one? Ekanwaro ndini ganya matope dza pasi. Zvinofadza sei kuve takaungana hedu kudai. How are you feeling? Was that strange? Tell the truth. A little bit. Well, I think it is strange, and it is also not strange. It is strange maybe because you didn't expect to hear me speaking in a language that you all can understand, but it is also important just to remind ourselves that there are almost 7,000 languages in the world, and they are in many bodies, even in this room. So that's where we started. So I was greeting you in the way I like to introduce myself. So I want to just give my appreciation to Karen and Danielle for inviting me to come along this evening. I want us to start by going into our bodies because quite often we forget that our bodies are there. We just carry on with our busy lives and our things that are troubling us in our heads. And so just a small quick thing. Can I first ask you to greet each other by saying, Hekani? Hekani. I think I'm leaving. Okay, you said it as if I'm teaching you how to say it. So now I want you to try and say it as if you are happy to be here. And it's a wonderful occasion. Okay, shall we try again? Ekani. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. So, could I invite you to just kind of draw a circle in front of you in the air? Beautiful. Okay, let that go. And do a plus sign. Nice one. Okay, can you write your name? Excellent. Okay, so back to that circle again. And now keep the circle going. Bring back the plus sign. With your other hand. Okay, okay. The body's alive, hopefully. Yes, so I'm going to just say that I'm going to do two poems just to set things off, and then looking forward to hearing the lecture and the conversation. I'm going to start with a poem in Shona, one of the languages in Zimbabwe. There are 16 official languages in Zimbabwe, and one of the things I noticed about my parents' generation, they don't define the languages very specifically. They sort of drift between them, and they improvise and devise, which is what I love. And so languages can be quite a scary thing. People can feel their borders between languages, and so I'm thinking about language in that way. So I'm going to do this poem. It's a lullaby, and I will just pre-translate it for you. So it's about how language is connected to the land. So in the poem, the baby is crying and distressed and wondering where mom has gone, and then the poem kind of talks about the landscape and things that happen on the landscape. Mwanangu achemako achemera mai vakaenda kwadya mupunga magaka aorera mhiri kwamungezi kune banga jena rekucheka nyama ndeye parware pasiyo zarevu heino njiva inoguruguta nekamwana muzasi kamwe kari kumba kanokange zviyo zvavatete tsanga yangu yawa yazonongwa nani nambya dende vazoisepi murwizi rukuru runodyiwa shamvu nenhengetenge tsvigaka. Again. Since you're all sitting there, time for a test. One of these items is called a nduku. Dominic, you'll be cheating on this one. So one of these items is called nduku. Which one do you think it is? Let me see hands for this one. Okay, let me see hands for this one. That's fine. That's all. We can talk about it later. I only did that because there's a lot that happened in that short moment. You created a logic, right? You created a logic, the sound of the word and all of that. But we can talk about that later. Okay. So I'm going to do my poem in English is called Records, because I think in education we are dealing with records all the time. We are creating records as we write our papers and books, and we're digging into the records, the archives, as we quote and reference. So records. So this is indirectly inspired by vinyl, which is making a comeback, I understand. And so it's records with a K, because I'm an archetype. Records. Big up the system. The sound system. Good sounds sound better than the best of hearsay, don't they? And society, poor thing, just can't afford discord. For instance, here at the Sociology Review, we can do without boxing, unless, of course, it's beatboxing. We can do without anything breaking, unless, of course, it's sweat breaking. Maybe even a little breakdancing. Good sounds sound better than the best of hearsay, don't they? Shout out to all in the house. Hekani! Two people are awake. Shout out to all in the house. Hekani! Shout out to the DJ. I want to see those turntables. I want to see those tables turn. Feel those turntables turn. What sounds do they play in your mind? What sound do they play in your time? It used to be on the mic, the MC, and on the decks, singles or the LP. Remember records? Putting on the needle and that ragged crackle of vinyl. Just think, how many records has it been since records began? Probably record numbers, but that's just guessing. Record keepers know for certain. Record keepers keep a lot of records. I wonder if they keep the one I really like. That one, you know, the one that goes, we're all different, but it's all relevant. I don't know if they keep that one. They seem to only keep track of the one that's been dominating the charts. That one, you know, the one where all the vocals want to lead while the band plays beautifully on instruments of torture. It's the one that goes around and around and around and around and around in a vicious cycle. Record spinners, record players play plenty of records. I'm just listening out for when they play the one I really like. That one, you know, the one with no words, the one that's instrumental in communicating the universal. I don't know if they'll play that one. They seem to only play the other one. That one, you know, the one, instead of the original, they seem to always play the cover-up version. And record spinners spin plenty of records. I can't wait for them to spin the one I really like. That one, you know, the one about the earth on its axis, winning over the world and its excess. I don't know if they'll spin that one. They always seem to spin the other one. That one, you know, the one with that irritating chant, chant, chant. Want, want, want. There's a record that's big just now. You probably all know this one. It's the one featuring the boys and girls. Boys dressed in chains, posing and grinning. Girls dressed like they're going swimming. That one, you know, the one, is the one that keeps skipping, keeps skipping, keeps skipping, keeps skipping, keeps skipping, keeps skipping, keeps skimming over the surface. Remember records? Forget it. They'll never play the one I really want to hear. The one they said was banned and should remain unreleased. The one which says, hearsay says, should be banned and remain unreleased. Hearsay saying, it sends you into a trance-like state. Find yourself dancing in a trance-like state. I don't have a clue. All I have is knowledge that we will still do what we sometimes do what we've always done. Listen to the sounds. Sounds like it's time to go off the record. Hekan.
So I'm now going to get to the reason that you're all here, which is to hear the discussion that we have this evening between Shahram and Carolina. As with all of the best speakers, they don't need introduction, but we shall do so anyway. Shahram is a professor of anthropology at Stockholm University. His research interests include the anthropology of Iran, forced displacement, border studies, and temporality. He is the author of The Illegal Traveller and Autoethnography of Borders, Precarious Lives, Waiting and Hope in Iran, After Deportation, Ethnographic Perspectives, Waiting, a Project in Conversation, Seeing Like a Smuggler, Borders from Below, and The Gaze of the X-Ray, an Archive of Violence. And our discussant, Carolina, is a lecturer in sociology at the University of Glasgow, and her research explores the intersection of migration, violence, border management, and how these shape everyday experiences of people on the move. And with that, I'll hand over now to Shahram to lead us this evening now.
Thank you.
Want to use this mic?
Yeah. Thank you so much for for having me here. Thank you, the Sociological Review Foundation and Journal, for making this happen. It's a great pleasure for me to be here to talk about question about migration studies in dark times. Dark times comes from Hannah Arendt to me. Hannah Arendt saw dark time as a period of political crisis, moral decline, and cultural decay. However, she did not use darkness to refer to the horror themselves, like the Holocaust, like the genocide in Palestine. Rather, darkness was her term for how these horrors were falsified and misrepresented in public discourse. Darkness falls upon us when horrors appears before us, yet remains hidden, or when they appear as something else. The dark time is a time of political oppression, the erosion of public space, and collapse of public life, isolation and silence. Arendt's notion of dark times describes periods when the public realm of truthful speech and judgment collapse under the weight of ideology and propaganda. George Orwell also believed that darkness takes the form of linguistic corruption. The one indicator of growing fascism is when language becomes the defense of the indefensible. Ann Staller uses the term colonial aphasia to describe the condition in which violence is unnamed or misnamed. So this is what I mean with dark time. And a major problem in discourses about migration, both within and beyond academia, is the tendency to use a vocabulary that externalizes the issue instead of analyzing migration as a consequence of the inherent contradictions of the nation-state system. Migration is framed as the cause of those contradictions, as if it were a problem or originating from the outside. The perspectives marginalize and externalize social forces, processes, and actors that do not fit within a state-centric narrative. Fleeing famine in Gaza or fleeing economical sanction against Iran caused by United States, or fleeing Pakistan because of environmental disasters driven by industrial climate change. All are political persecutions. They are not economic migrants. They are not economic migrants exploiting the asylum system as Trump and his administrations and many governments in Europe claim. Calling poor people on move economic migrants is a way to misname the real reason of their migration. Mass displacement in Sudan is linked to the European Union's investment in the rapid support forces. Similarly, more than 2 million Mexican farmers went bankrupt as a consequence of NAFTA. Racial capitalism destabilizes communities and pushes people into migration, while nationalism at the same time criminalizes them. In this sense, migration is both produced and illegalized by the very same system that constructed it as a problem. Yet these dynamics are often framed as if migration were a consequence of forces and factors outside the national order of things, and the outside of racial capitalism. the falsification and misrepresentation of the causes of migration forces us to pose an urgent question. What vocabulary, what language do we need in order to practice migration studies in a way that is both politically responsible and intellectually honest? This question emerges from my own position as both the subject and the object of migration studies, from being the researcher 27 years and the researched 38 years. I attempt to theorize from a position on the other side of the border. I want to theorize as a migrant, not as a professor. To theorize from the other side of the border is a critique. Critique is not only an act of negation, but a transformative effort. It seeks to expose how migration studies paradoxically can reproduce the very barriers that hinder a deeper understanding of what we try to understand. It is a critique of the idea of a view from nowhere, that is the illusion of objectivity in research. The view from nowhere is always a view from above. The critique emerges from years of self-interrogation, asking myself, for whom? For whom do I produce knowledge? And who needs migration studies? Perhaps many policymakers, journalists, activists, lawyers, academics. But what about migrants themselves? Do they need migration studies? Do we produce knowledge that is useful for them? Do they need the knowledge we generate in order to survive, to cross borders, to navigate the labyrinth of asylum or migration processes, to establish themselves in the new society? Or are we producing something they already know? Migrants do not need migration studies. And I have two arguments for that. First, in migration studies, we often find the conceptual abstraction becomes confused with reality. We mistake what is abstract in the mind for what is concrete in the world. Migration studies is linguistically mediated, and metaphors constitute the very fabric of theory building. It is therefore crucial to recognize that migration itself is not a self-evident fact, but a metaphor. As Jacques Derrida said a long time ago, concepts are metaphors whose origins have been forgotten. Metaphors function as a cognitive tool that makes abstract or complex ideas understandable or by rendering them familiar. Metaphors, concepts, category, and method are intervened. In migration studies, metaphors such as guest worker, integration, undocumentedness, illegal migration, belonging, uprootedness, home, operates in this way. These metaphors have become concepts, and we have forgotten that they once were only metaphors. When a metaphor is turned into a concept, it appears as an objective, bonded reality. An abstraction becomes a fabricated social category. And then we create a method to study, and through method we produce numbers, statistics, descriptions about that category. This is the point at which metaphors become socially and politically dangerous. Metaphors are instruments that shape how knowledge is produced, communicated. Once a metaphor becomes popularized, it circulates among academics, journalists, activists, policymakers. It structures how an issue is conceptualized. Metaphors configure epistemic authority. Whoever controls the dominant metaphor controls the framing of the issue and shapes the ethical and political debates around it. In general, metaphors in migration studies can distort the very concepts they are meant to illuminate. They depoliticize complex issues by making them sound technical or like integration. They reinforce inequalities by privileging particular view, like person with a migration background. And they shape the collective imagination, limiting alternative way of thinking about migration. Take the term persons with a migration background, often defined as individual with at least one parent who was not a citizen at birth. Here, the metaphor becomes biological. It no longer refers to movement across border, but to blood. Metaphor, concepts, and methods become together. Metaphors shaped what counts as evidence, who is studied, and how research is designed. The term migrant functions as a metaphor for non-belonging. When it is treated as empirical reality, it produces a forged figure that becomes the target of research, policy, and debate. Forge has a double meaning. The figure of migrant is a forgery because it is both constructed and falsified at the same time. Consider the sentence, Ahmad is a migrant. The metaphor transforms Ahmad from a plural subject into a person compelled to perform singularity in the role of the migrant. In this translation, a figure who is constituted by multiple histories, relations, and social locations is compressed into a single category. The metaphor domesticates the foreigner by converting him into a familiar type, the migrant, a figure legible within state and public discourse because he has been stripped of his plurality. And yet this familiarity is paradoxical because the migrant becomes understandable only through the very difference he is forced to embody. The migrant appears as a knowable figure whose legibility is achieved through the reduction of a complex subject to a simplified role, one that simultaneously otherize him. Individuals become migrants through bureaucratic and legal practices. Ahmad, the example, Ahmad in my example, Ahmad's migranthood makes sense only in interaction with law or administration. Outside those encounters, why should he be regarded as a migrant at all? Being a student, for example, shows a role, indicates a role within a specific institutional context, such as a university or school. Outside that context, the same person is a sister, is a mother, is a lover, is a worker, is a politician. One is labeled and treated as a student only while participating in the rules and regulations and administrative processes of university or school, not after, not before. So why then should being a migrant not be understood in a similarly situational way? We as a migration scholar in migration studies, have depicted the migrants as if he or she is suspended, stuck in the moment of border crossing, frozen in a single temporality. The crucial question, therefore, is not who is a migrant. The question is when one is a migrant. Borders rely on migrants occupying a single coherent identity: refugee, skilled worker, irregular migrants, asylum seekers, etc. The multiplicity of the self is collapsed into a single legal and political persona. Migration regimes do not only misrecognize migrants, they actively produce migrants as a singular figure by editing away the plurality that constitutes their lived reality. In this process, the plurality of the human condition is destroyed through the forced singularity imposed by border regime. Hannah Arendt reminds us that plurality is the basic condition of political life. When the border reduces people to an administrative category, they are denied a space of appearance in a public space. They don't appear as who they are, but as what they are: a migrant, an externally imposed singularity. In this process, a person's entire life is reduced to a single quantifiable dimension. When a metaphor becomes a concept and the concept is treated as a fixed category, people remain classified as a foreigner long after their border crossing. The migrant becomes a subject pertified in an essentialized foreignness. The danger of this have been evident in the Windrush scandal, in the ongoing violence carried out by ICE. ICE is American Border and Custom Enforcement in big cities in the United States, and also mass deportation of people born in Iran who are labeled as migrants. The second argument for why migrants do not need migration studies is this. In what we assume we know about migration, what is not included is migrants' own knowledge. When migrants' intellectual life is invisibilized within migration studies, their capacity to be recognized as knowing subjects is taken from them. This is what Miranda Fricke called epistemic injustice. Epistemic injustice places the migrant in the position of disadvantage. The migrant's knowledge is systematically perceived as less creditable, and therefore her capacity as a knower is devalued. Migrant knowledge is included as experience, as empirical data, but excluded as concepts and theories. This injustice, this epistemic injustice, extends to the way migrants are denied full participation in defining the problems of migration studies, the questions in migration studies. Migrants' questions do not become research questions. Who decides which questions become research questions and which are left out? When we choose a question to study, the interests of many different actors within and beyond academia are taken into consideration. These actors include research funders, universities, publishers, and international organizations. But we never ask migrants what they want to be studied. We study for them. The process of problematization excludes the migrants' way of knowing. My argument is that migrants do not see themselves as the audience of migration studies because the knowledge we produce is what they have lived with for a long time. They already know it, or they have no use of that. Let me give you one example. A very big research program, several years, many professors involved, studied relation between migrants with Muslim names and access to labor market. And after 4,000 cases, they came to the conclusion that if you have a Muslim name, you get 15% less income per year. In all this research, never race was mentioned. Not even discrimination was mentioned. And when I asked the professors, when they presented, I asked them, how come that you don't use term race or discrimination? The answer was this. We don't know if the less access to labor market or lower wage for those with Muslim names has to do with racial or ethnic discrimination, because we didn't ask that question. So the research in this example externalizes the question by avoiding the issue of race. The problem lies in the migrants and their names, rather than the racially biased structure of the labor market. This kind of research naturalizes and depoliticizes differences and thereby confirm the existing differential access to resources. The description of difference through externalization and exceptionalization reproduces mechanisms that confirm what they claim to dismantle. This kind of research shifts the focus from politics, which is responsibility of the society, to the migrants who are responsible for their Muslim names. Depoliticized description of difference only reproduce the difference. And this is a difference that is used against migrants. This is only describing migrants' objecthood through describing depoliticized differences. These studies only illustrate what migrants already know. Any child with a Muslim name since age of 10, they know that their name will be a barrier for them. They know these things. What they need to know is who profits from racism, who profits from their Muslim names. They need to know that becoming a migrant is not simply an individual incident. Being a migrant is part of a long historical structure, the longue durée of migration. Migration studies fail to show the larger picture, the long-term historical structures and developments that persist across generations, shaping who becomes a migrant, under what conditions, and for whose benefits. We can claim that migrants are one of the most researched social categories in the world. There is no single aspect of their life which is not studied. So after decades of knowledge production about migration, what do we actually know? And then what kind of migration studies is needed? Based on what I have said now, so I try to answer this question. We must include the migrant as one who is able to theorize her situation. The migrant should not only be a source of experience data for which scholars extract. The migrant is a producer of theory as well. Migrant theorization emerges from the subject position on the other side of the border, or in Gloria Anzaldua's word, in the borderland. It is from this position that new questions become possible, or that familiar questions appear differently. What do we see if we look at the border from the other side? What do we see if we view the law through the eyes of the illegalized travelers? The other side of the border is epistemologically crucial. This space is inhabited by those at the margin who collide with the law, who must confront borders, who move without arriving, who cross the border only to find the border appearing ahead of them again and again and again. Those for whom borders are constructed. These are the people who mass produce knowledge about borders and bordering practices in order to survive. With migrants, when migrants theorize, marginality becomes a site of radical openness and basis for articulating counter discourses. Bell hooks. The privileged, they don't need produce knowledge about borders or migration because they don't face the problems. The repositioning, this repositioning I'm talking about, produces relations to knowledge otherwise, the knowledge that is otherwise unavailable. Migrants' struggles makes clear that those who are not recognized as knowers or even political agents are often the ones who develop new forms of participation and new democratic demands. This is a reference to Etienne Balibar too. This repositioning is now more than necessary than ever if we don't recognize migrants and as an audience, and if we don't include the migrants as a theorizing subject, we only repeat the same discourse without transforming anything. Theorizing from the other side of the border produces new relations to knowledge and concepts that are otherwise excluded from the mainstream knowledge production. This is crucial to any critical theory seeking to avoid reproducing epistemic injustice. And this is not about identity. This is about the struggles. I'm not talking about the question, where are you from? I'm asking, where does your knowledge come from? So this is not about identity politics. It's about struggles. Crucial. So here in Europe and in North America, we talk about a new age of darkness, a new dark time. The question must be this For whom is it dark? Darkness is not a new thing, is not a new condition for many of those who we study in migration studies. They are they are stuck between the darkness of socio-political conditions they flee and the darkness of the places to which they arrive. Darkness signifies the collapse of truth, as Arendt said, and the first phase of darkness for people on move is the great lie of borders. Escaping one darkness only to encounter another shows how darkness stretches across time and space and how different forms of darkness are interrelated. During so-called refugee crisis 2015, 2016, when thousands people walked through the Balkan, and then borders were closed for them, to them. They started protesting and they chanted slogans in their own languages. They chanted the slogans, open borders and freedom, freedom. In Arabic, they chanted infitah, means openness. And in Persian, they chanted azadi, which means freedom. These are the very same slogans that people have been chanting for decades across the Middle East against dictators. By calling for freedom and openness, migrants linked the struggles for infitah through the Arab world and the struggles for azadi for Iran and Afghanistan and Kashmir to the struggles for openness and freedom in Europe. Their chants showed how the oppressive fences in Europe are connected to oppressive forces in Kabul, Damascus, Tehran, Istanbul, and across Palestine. What insights can we gain from individuals who have inhabited this darkness, those who have to struggle and survive the darkness? The Mexican-American philosopher Mariana Alessandri, in her book Night Vision, published a few years ago, offers a critical analysis of the Enlightenment, European Enlightenment's emphasis on light as the fundamental source of knowledge, wisdom, and well-being, contrary to European modernity that emerges from Enlightenment, characterized by brightness, lucidity, transparency, and predictability. The perspective of the illegalized travelers seek to comprehend the world through a state of darkness, marked by opacity, ambiguity, and unpredictability. The concept of darkness must therefore be understood in relation to the struggle and survival of people on the move. By embracing these struggles, a more profound level of insight into the world of motion and migration become possible. The theories produced by people on the move carry not only conceptual significance, but also political. They help frame and articulate both intellectual debate and political struggles. Migrant theorizing comes from direct engagement with borders and bordering practices. Such engagement generates new words, phrases, concepts, imaginaries. The perspectives and themes beyond each concept and each act of theorizing are rooted in what Gloria and Zaldua call borderland and what I call the other side of the border. It is the embodied knowledge of the borderland. The urgency of these theories emerges from the intersection of imagination and geopolitical reality. What I suggest is not simply to translate emic terms into European languages, not to include migrants' voices only as empirical data or individual experiences, but to engage intellectually and politically in theorizing from the other side of the border. This is an attempt to reimagine and reconceptualize the border beyond the framework produced by mainstream academia and knowledge system grounded in nation-state framework. My intervention tonight, my intervention presented now here is in line with a recent but growing critique of migration studies. A main feature of this critique is an invitation to remove the figure of the migrant from the analysis. The critique can be framed in the well-known concept, this is very difficult to say it, demigranticize. Yeah, demigranticizing, coined by Janine Dahinden in Switzerland, who asked to redirect analytical attention from supposedly migrant-specific problem to the broader structures, inequalities, and power relations that actually shape social life. This intervention is important, but my argument goes in a different direction. I argue for the necessity of including the migrant, not removing him, but including him, not as object of a study, but as a theorizing subject. Demigranticization helps expose the structural forces that produce the category migrants, but it must be paired with an understanding of migrants as producers of knowledge in their own right. This does not reinforce the category of migrant, it rather repositions it, making it visible, the epistemic agency, making visible the epistemic agency of those who inhabit and survive the spaces that dominate epistemological, that dominant of epistemologies overlook. Sorry. Migrants witness the rise of fascism with a particular clarity. The war by ICE in the United States is not directed only against undocumented migrants anymore, but against anyone who is not white, who is not rich. As Nicolas de Genoa argues, this is becoming more a form of civil war. We see it also in Europe. Across Europe, right-wing politics has deepened social polarization, and governments mobilize one part of the society against another. This is the definition of civil war. Migrants see how countries they have escaped to begin to resemble the countries they escaped from. And this is how darkness here is linked to the darkness over there. This is moving from one darkness to another. The knowledge produced by those who have been forced to resist and to survive multiple forms of darkness, both the darkness they escaped from and the darkness they encounter here offers all of us, migrants and non-migrants alike, concepts and tools for confronting these realities. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Thanks,
Thank you, Shahram. That was great talk. And I have to say that when I was approached to be a discussant of your work, I was really humbled and I was really happy because I've been reading your work and following your work for ages as a student and later on as an early career scholar. But also very nervous about commenting on a work of someone who appears in the kind of essential course readings for most of the courses of migration, border studies, who everyone knows. So I think that probably I'm not going to comment or bring into discussion anything new. I'm just going to provide some humble comments and hopefully include some more questions that we can discuss together. Also, because all of you came here to listen to Shahram, I'm not going to take too much space. I promise I'm going to limit my comments into probably 10 to maximum 15 minutes. And then you will have a chance to debate with Shahram because this is a really unique opportunity. I think, first of all, I want to bring some light into the darkness because there has been a lot of talk about darkness, not just in dominant migration studies, but generally speaking in public debates, in media. I understand that some of the people who are sitting here, colleagues or students, you don't necessarily study migration studies. You came here just out of curiosity, but you still might be kind of feeling that the darkness from media or the public discourse is really dominant. However, I have to say that 2 weeks back, this is just one of the examples, I attended an event at the local Maryhill Community Center where Teresa, who is sitting here, and many other activists and scholars, they came and they debated solidarity in migration. And there was a lady, which was called Yvonne Blake, who comes from migrant community, forced displacement context, and she set up a really amazing group of migrant solidarity here in Glasgow. And she kept repeating, we live in beautiful times. These are beautiful times because the solidarity networks, they're growing. There are many people coming. And solidarity is about learning from each other. And there is something very beautiful about it and give us a lot of light in this darkness of dark migration governance that Shahram was discussing in great depth. I think that we can see it in so many different contexts and so many different examples. For example, I did a lot of research in the Balkan route and now in Bulgaria, the rescue operations in a national park of forests where the police or state officers, they are pushing illegally people back, beating them, leaving them in a forest without clothes in freezing temperatures. They've been rescued by a community kind of solidarity network, which has been triggered by Syrian nationals, Syrian refugees who passed the route. And upon arriving in a final destination, they set up this online support network, engage international volunteers, local residents, and there's a huge rescue operation right now going on. Also, we can see, for example, on the examples of the Maghreb communities, people from Algeria and Morocco, who are one of the people who are not really legally recognized as asylum seekers and refugees. And I think Shahram was rightfully debating between these divisions, legally codified terms that are causing so much mess in reality. And this group of people coming from Morocco and Algeria who come for formal colonies, where actually the colonial powers are still deciding which goods and which people can leave the countries until now, and then illegalize people as they move onwards, and oftentimes deny them to seek asylum upon arriving in final destinations. They set up a huge Facebook and Twitter group where thousands and thousands of people collecting donations, sharing information, supporting each other when they are crossing borders, and also trying to help each other when they arrive in a final destination, how to navigate this undocumented situation when actually most of them cannot really seek asylum. These are just small notes of light that I want to bring into this discussion, and just really remember that there is a light in the darkness and we should be motivated by it in migration studies. Language used in migration studies, however, as Shahram pointed, is incredibly problematic. I think in some of the Shahram's notes was also a reference to the UNHCR that especially now currently is pushing to more divisions to kind of divide who are migrants and who are the deserving asylum seekers and refugees. So we are living in a very politically fragile moment when these categories are even more pushed to forefront. And that's, of course, really sad. But I think that I would like to add to this discussion that these categories do not only matter in people's home countries or after when they come and arrive to the final destination, but they also matter a lot in border contexts, in these places in between. Shahram said the other side of the border, the borderlands, where people are not just passing, they are stuck there for months, they are stuck there for years. And for example, when people flee from impoverished regions, struggle to purchase services of people smugglers. So when the poor people move, they cannot oftentimes afford to pay people smugglers to embark on more comfortable or even more secure or safe passages. So oftentimes the poor are the most exposed to dangerous border crossing across dangerous border landscapes, apprehensions by state authorities, direct violence, harms and deaths and so forth. So I want to say that just the poverty when moving is thus very closely interlinked with situation of physical harm, death, and state persecutions in borders. So the division between migrant and refugees is not just only problematic because it just doesn't distinguish the reasons that are very much blurred, but also it penetrates the way how people move and the way how they navigate their journeys. This also matters after arriving in final destinations, when those considered as illegal or undocumented migrants then often struggle to access legal work. With this exclusion from this legal labor, migrants can only include themselves into the labor market through undocumented work, which is the most profitable for capitalist societies that rely on cheap labors, cheap products. But undocumented labor comes with further state persecution when the rights are on those who are working without documents, and also different harms at work. So here we again see some interconnection between, let's say, just migration and situations of harm, persecution, poverty that needs to be kind of mindful or brought into discussion, I feel. And how to overcome the language of divisions. I would add to it, importantly, in migration studies that are so much divided, because I feel that as migration scholars, we oftentimes don't really agree on most of the stuff. And I think this is even particularly even more challenging question. For instance, political scientists or those people who use mainly quantitative methods, as Shahram pointed in some of the study on Muslim names and racialization that has been omitted in access to labor, they oftentimes use these terms and then say, we need these terms and we need these divisions because we need them for some political responsibility of global movement. Who is actually able to move? Not everyone can move. We still need these processes continue. There are many migration scholars who would propose these arguments. But then we have many sociologists, anthropologists, or people who are more into immersed and intensive field work in borderlands and different migration contexts and say, no, we actually need to challenge them and we need to move beyond them. So I think how we can find consensus and how we can strive for transformation of migration studies if we don't agree among ourselves, that's a big question I maybe would like Shahram to also comment on a little bit later on. I also feel that in migration studies, we commonly talk about struggle or harm and solidarity. So we have these two opposing situations that are kind of showing that migration is always happening in extraordinary events, in something that is out of normality, that otherwise no one else can experience, which is also reproducing these ideas that migration is not normal because it's only happening through victimization or heroism, right? Or something that is kind of opposing to each other. Shahram proposes to build theory in active collaboration with migrant communities, which I really appreciate, and I think most of the people, they are a fan of this approach, of course. I just wonder whether this could be about paying attention to metaphors that you said are so key and so important to produce categories and later theories. So it would be, for instance, rather not to use migrant, but many people say I'm a traveler, not to use the word of migration, but game playing. Most of the people in the Balkans, they don't talk about border crossing, they don't talk about migrating, they say we play the game. So understand migration processes through these metaphors. Or not people smuggling, but border business, facilitation, as most people smugglers would say, this is how they approach their work, this is how they understand their work. But then you said it's not just about translation, it's not just about picking words and kind of trying to fit them into European language and just mentioning them here and there, and that's it. I think that to a small extent, I would slightly disagree with the idea when you said that the big questions that we need to answer to migrant communities is, for example, who profit from migration governance, or how it's interconnected with historical and contemporary structural processes. I believe that actually migrant communities, including many migrant scholars, know so much better than people coming from non-migrant communities how these very complex and oftentimes over-theoretical processes are interconnected. I mean, for example, people who are escaping for former colonies, many of you would tell you that they're escaping economic impoverishment or ecological decay that has been caused by colonial powers, for example, France and Algeria and Morocco, and it's their right to go now and move to kind of overcome these issues. And here you have a very complex thought that is connecting past and present, structural processes of economy, ecology, but also politics, with a very personal social process of migration. So I wonder if this is the way how to theorize, if we have to move beyond these metaphors and believe that we as scholars are not the ones who draw these connections, but rather we have to learn and listen about these connections from migrant communities. Also, I think that a big question is for whom this work is. You said that the migrants don't need migration studies. But then you also consider that migration studies should be politically committed. They should strive for some change. And I wonder if with our work, we are trying to produce counter-narratives, we are trying to push towards political pressure to different supranational organizations, policymakers, or different groups that are governing migration. So if we are able to do that at least a bit, and if a slight change in some action happens, isn't this an outcome for migrant communities? I wonder. I think that there's one example when there was extensive documentation of border violence when many scholars were included in the Balkan route. And once it came out, it was also published in different media platforms, the police violence stopped for some time. And many people were able to cross the border from Bosnia and Herzegovina to Croatia. And I think that there is the result of a political pressure, although it doesn't challenge the status quo. We can see small changes. Shouldn't we see them and be motivated by them? That's my question a bit more for you. So in that way, not directly migrants need migration studies, but perhaps indirectly for engagements in these small or even bigger battles that have at least slight or small outcomes or can slow down some situations or fasten up some processes of protection. On the one hand, some of us would say, well, if you want to create political pressure, if we want to produce a really kind of active counter practices of counter narratives, we need to go and we need to speak to these supranational organizations such as IOM, UNHCR, policymakers, and so on. And we need to challenge them, we need to engage with the debate. However, does it really work? How to really produce these counter narratives and counter actions that disrupt hierarchy of knowledge rather than aid it? It's true, and myself, I've been really highly skeptical when trying to meet different policymakers, when still you're right that it's overly dominated by academics, by policymakers, and the migrant stories are presented as examples that the experts, the academic experts, or other people present, but still the migrant voices, their direct engagement is lacking, although there's a summary of what we observe, what's happening on the ground. I think that also important question is who is producing migration studies? You said that this is not about identity politics, that when someone is perhaps from a migrant community knows more, but it's more about from where our knowledge comes from. I think this was really beautifully put. I still want to say that maybe we should kind of think who is producing migration studies, and we should maybe move that transformation of migration studies from our oral or written performance into more everyday battles in our workplaces as well. Because, for example, I think that the universities do not do enough to create pathways to education and academic knowledge production through scholarship, from canceling the fees for people who are fleeing different reasons or for migrants. I also think that we oftentimes participate in some of the migration governance in the universities when we are engaging in migration checks through visa checks, whether students come to our tutorials or not. So what to do about that? And finally, our universities, as it came out or was leaked recently, do engage or do invest into arms. And these arms end up in war zones and they produce forced migration. So I also want to kind of conclude with this question, shouldn't the transformation of migration studies move beyond our academic, oral, and written performance and penetrate the way how we act in our workplaces and support our colleagues and students as well? I think I will stop here so that we can have discussion together. Thank you, Shahram. It was great to listen to.